Here's what's coming up.
U.S. President Donald Trump addresses a joint session of Congress and lauds the early steps taken by his administration to slash the government bureaucracy. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance supports the White House and comments on the pause in aid to Ukraine as a possible resumption of the peace talks. And in Ghana, secondhand clothes are donated to charities worldwide, but they often end up in landfills. Now, two Ghanaian brothers are taking a different approach to give secondhand clothes a new life cycle. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54.
We begin our broadcast with developing news. A divided U.S. Supreme Court on Wednesday is declining to let the White House withhold payment to foreign aid organizations for work they have already performed for the government as Republican President Donald Trump moves to halt American humanitarian projects around the world. Meanwhile, in our other big story, U.S. President Donald Trump delivered remarks before a joint session of Congress Tuesday evening, hailing the many early steps taken by his administration. White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara has more.
President Donald Trump's Tuesday evening speech marks his first address to a joint session of Congress since he began his second term on January 20.
America's momentum is back, our spirit is back, our pride is back, our confidence is back, and the American dream is surging bigger and better than ever before.
But barely 5 minutes in, the Democratic Representative Al Green of Texas began shouting that Trump had, quote, no mandate to cut Medicaid, the government aid program for medical coverage for low-income people.
Mr. Green, take your seat. Take your seat, sir.
Green was escorted out. Trump highlighted the steep tariffs he enacted Tuesday on China and U.S. neighbors Mexico and Canada. These top three U.S. trading partners have threatened retaliation, sending financial markets tumbling amid fears of a new trade war.
There'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that. It won't be much.
Earlier this week, Trump paused military aid to Ukraine, following last week's combative Oval Office meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky over a deal that would give the U.S. rights to Ukrainian rare earth minerals. It's part of his efforts to press Kyiv to take a deal to end the fight against Russia's invasion of the country.
Simultaneously, we've had serious discussions with Russia and have received strong signals that they are ready for peace.
In delivering the Democrats' response, Senator Elisa Slotkin of Michigan highlighted Trump's fiery exchange with Zelensky.
And that scene in the Oval Office wasn't just a bad episode of reality TV. It summed up Trump's whole approach to the world. He believes in cozying up to dictators like Vladimir Putin and kicking our friends like the Canadians in the teeth. He sees American leadership as merely a series of real estate transactions.
Other Democrats signaled their protest while Trump spoke, wearing pink to call attention to Trump's policies they say negatively impact women and families, and holding signs including Musk steals.
Doge. Perhaps you've heard of it. Perhaps.
Referring to efforts by tech billionaire Elon Musk to slash federal bureaucracy by canceling government contracts and firing tens of thousands of federal employees.
Any federal bureaucrat who resists this change will be removed from office immediately. Because we are draining the swamp.
Again, the Democrats' response from Slotkin.
You want to cut waste? I'll help you do it. But change doesn't need to be chaotic or make us less safe. The mindless firing of people who work to protect our nuclear weapons, keep our planes from crashing, and conduct the research that finds the cure for cancer, only to rehire them 2 days later? No CEO in America could do that without being summarily fired.
Trump credited himself for the drop in the number of migrants illegally crossing the U.S. southern border.
The media and our friends in the Democrat Party kept saying we needed new legislation, we must have legislation to secure the border. But it turned out that all we really needed was a new president.
Sitting with First Lady Melania Trump, were guests whose life experiences amplify her husband's agenda, including an activist against transgender athletes in women's sports and the family of a woman killed by an undocumented immigrant. Trump repeated his calls to take back the Panama Canal and take over Greenland, but not his demands to expel Palestinians from Gaza. He spoke for an hour and 40 minutes, the longest presidential speech to Congress. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News.
President Trump also specifically detailed some of the areas that the administration is trimming money out of federal budget and where he feels the U.S. taxpayers' money is being wasted.
$8 million to promote LGBTQI+ in the African nation of Lesotho, which nobody has ever heard of. $10 million for male circumcision in Mozambique. Have you ever heard of her? A $3.5 million consulting contract for lavish fish monitoring. $1.5 million for voter confidence in Liberia. $14 million for social cohesion in Mali.
For more insight into President Donald Trump's address to a joint session of Congress, I'm joined by Joseph Slavic, partner at Scribe Strategies and Advisors. Hello, Joseph. Let's start with, the president, of course, received applause from Republicans and not so from the Democrats. But what were the main takeaways out of the speech?
Well, it's to be expected, right? The party in power, you have half the chamber generally rising and applauding, and the other half kind of sitting on their hands. I think the president basically reiterated what he discussed during the campaign, which was obviously make America great again. They talked about immigration, trying to bring in line the cost of living, trying to improve things, and of course, government waste. So I think it was more about America first, and the president reinforcing what his agenda is. So I think he just continued to carry the message from his campaign.
Now, he spoke about the renewal of the American dream, as you mentioned, by also, given the downsizing of federal workers and winding up of some of the government agencies, somehow has kind of, divided what Americans in terms of how they're looking at what's their future like. How should the American people interpret this renewal of the American dream?
Yeah. I think most people outside the Beltway, outside of Washington, when they come home from work, they look at their check and they go, how much did the government take from me? So I think in terms of cutting down the government workforce, I don't think there's a lot of sympathy outside of Washington. I think people are sensitive. Obviously, if you're a government worker, it definitely impacts you. But I think most people outside of the Beltway, it's kind of a secondary issue for them, really, in terms of downsizing government. They're more concerned about price of eggs, price of gas, immigration issues. So I think that's the big issue there in terms of downsizing the government. And of course, I think making government more efficient. I don't think anyone really would complain about that.
Now, a lot of people watching Africa 54, they are like, what is in Trump's administration for the continent? What is the engagement of Trump with the continent of Africa likely to look like?
Yeah, I was just with some people at the White House yesterday who work on Africa, and the verbiage or the language was, it's deals and deterrence. So deals, obviously, meaning how can the U.S. do more business in Africa? How can we have more transactions? And deterrence is more related to security. I think the U.S. wants to find a way where Africa can be more stable without these massive, expensive UN peacekeeping operations. So it's basically, as I was told to me, it's deals and deterrence. And the president's looking on how U.S. companies can really be at the epicenter of doing business in Africa.
What would you say, this congressional address, that was the first one, at least now during his second term, points to when it comes to foreign policy?
Look, the State of the Union by the president was actually one of the longest ones. I think it was an hour and 40 minutes. And he touched on everything. Obviously, look, he said things about Lesotho. There were some, let's say, some things that may have been said that maybe outside of the U.S. may be perceived as insensitive, but in the U.S., because of the domestic nature of his agenda, I think a lot of his base would be on board with it. So, and as you know, there was reference to Uganda, Zambia, I think Liberia. There were references to monies being spent. So I think there's going to be, in terms of U.S. foreign assistance, it will be definitely revisited as to how can we not only provide efficiency, but I think also there's going to be an expectation by these governments to be also accountable.
Joel, many thanks.
Thank
You've
you,
been
Esther.
here since morning today.
I have.
Thank you
And
so
last
much
night.
for coming to the studio.
Thank you, Esther.
Joe Slavic is a partner at Scribe Strategies and Advisors. As we continue our coverage of President Trump's address to a joint session of the U.S. Congress, joining us now is Sombo Muzata, an assistant professor of political science at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Hello, Professor Muzata.
Hello, Esther. How are you?
I'm good. What are your takeaways from the president's speech to Congress last night?
Yeah, that was a very interesting speech, packed a lot. I heard the mention of my country, Zambia, and the 250 million slash allocation on some programs via USAID as well as other countries as well. I think the big broad message that the president is communicating to the entire continent is that what we had seen in the past is not going to fly anymore. The allocations towards aid, we know USAID has been closed. All that era is gone, and we've come into a new era of perhaps, economic and trade diplomacy, I hope. But then also we are in an era that is being framed as one of promoting efficiency, government efficiency. So I think the message that African countries must be taking from this is how can they work with the US government to ensure that they work towards efficiency as well. Because the aid era is gone.
Sambo, you mentioned that, and I'm thinking, of course, when the president came again into this second term of his presidency, he did stress on America first. What should that mean for Africa? How should Africa take that message?
Yeah, America first means everybody else is second or last, okay? So we can definitely say it's not Africa second, it's probably Africa last. And I think that African countries must be looking within for a start and consolidating other partnerships that they have, not writing off the US. I think seeking ways to work in a better way with the United States of America. I said a little earlier, focusing on efficiency. Can the US work with African governments to enhance efficiency, for example? And can we trade a little bit more? We know that right now China trades more with Africa than the US trades with Africa. So can African countries be positioning themselves to trade a little bit more with the United States? I think that's sort of the direction that we should be taking.
We haven't had the president talk about tariffs in Africa. We had him talk about them in southern, the southern countries here, China and all of that. But how might trade tariffs impact Africa?
They will impact the continent negatively, sadly. And it's because Africa is a net exporter of raw materials. So because we just produce raw materials and we export that, once countries that are finishing off those raw materials into actual goods and services that are needed on the market are hit by tariffs, we get hit as well. Just the other day, I was reading the story about the chocolate company Lindt and how it's working towards navigating the tariffs that are coming. And they import some of their cocoa, most of it from Ghana. So tariffs are going to hit African countries negatively. And I think countries need to be thinking and preparing what kind of strategy they have to put in place to mitigate the negative impacts from that.
Professor Muzata, very well said. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Sombo Muzata is an assistant professor of political science at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance elaborates on whether the pause in aid to Ukraine gives Russia an advantage.
Look, what the president has said very clearly about our Ukraine policy is that he wants the Ukrainians to come to the negotiating table. We want the Ukrainians to have a sovereign and an independent country. We think the Ukrainian troops have fought very bravely, but we're at a point here where neither Europe nor the United States nor the Ukrainians can continue this war indefinitely. So it's important that everybody come to the table, and the president is trying to send a very explicit message. The Ukrainians have got to come to the table and start negotiating with President Trump.
Vance also spoke about whether Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky should change his attitude or do anything else to come back to the table for negotiations to end the war with Russia.
Look, I think the most important thing, a lot of people have made this about public statements. President Zelensky needs to say that he's committed to the peace, or President Zelensky needs to apologize to the president. The public stuff doesn't matter nearly as much as what are the Ukrainians doing to meaningfully engage on what a peaceful settlement would look like. We need the Ukrainians privately to come to us and say, this is what we need, this is what we want, this is how we're going to participate in the process to end this conflict. That is the most important thing. And that lack of private engagement is what is most concerning to us.
That was U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance speaking on several key issues the Trump administration is dealing with. President Trump ordered a pause Monday to military aid shipments to Ukraine with immediate effect, which his administration says was aimed at forcing all sides to peace talks. As Henry Ridgwell reports from London, European leaders say it is vital to continue weapons shipments to Kyiv, but doubts remain over how long Ukraine can keep on fighting.
As news broke overnight Monday of the US decision to halt military aid to Kyiv, Russian drones continued to rain down on Ukrainian cities. Ukrainian lawmakers say the consequences of Washington's decision will be stark.
This means that thousands of people will die.
West of Donetsk, Ukraine, near the town of Pokrovsk, the war grinds on.
We fire an Italian howitzer, but we get a lot of ammunition, including 105mm caliber, from the U.S. It is NATO standard, which is used in both Europe and the U.S. But whether Europe will be able to supply us, I hope it will.
Can Europe make up for the shortfall of military aid from the US?
There are certain systems ranging from Patriot missiles all the way through to spare parts for the Abrams tanks and Bradley personnel carriers that the Ukrainians are using, that the only way the Europeans can get is by buying them on the open market, and that is going to take time.
But Ukraine is increasingly producing its own weapons.
Probably about half the weapons which Ukraine is now using are provided by its own defense industry. And of the remainder, it's about half and half between the United States and the others, including the Europeans.
The US provides other crucial assistance, including shipping Western weapons into Ukraine.
And finally, the US plays a very important role in providing information intelligence to the Ukrainian forces.
The Trump administration says the halt in military aid is, quote, to ensure that it is contributing to a solution.
Neither Europe, nor the United States, nor the Ukrainians can continue this war indefinitely. So it's important that everybody come to the table.
Britain's Prime Minister said Sunday that a coalition of the willing would continue to support Ukraine.
Vice President Vance's claim that a lot of the European leaders who on social media and in public are foursquare behind Kyiv, but in private they're actually much more sceptical, is not entirely incorrect. Do you essentially continue to hollow out your own armed forces and also alienate your most powerful security ally and guarantor in the name of defending Ukraine?
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky appealed to the Trump administration Tuesday, writing on X that Ukraine was committed to peace. For Ukrainians suffering under Russian bombardment, the cut in US aid is a bitter outcome.
I hope that he will change his mind. The victim of aggression cannot be guilty of everything and be punished in addition to that.
Maybe Europe can help somehow. The hope is only on Europe now, no one else.
Russia, meanwhile, welcomed Washington's decision to halt military aid to Ukraine, saying it may help, quote, to settle the situation by peaceful means. Henry Ridgwell, VOA News.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, on Diho has our technology report on second-hand clothes. Stay with us.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, U.S. President Donald Trump addresses a joint session of Congress after 6 weeks in office, during which he focuses on issues that affect America the most. Join me, Vincent McCory, in an in-depth look at President Trump's speech and its significance for Africa.
On the 8th of March 2025, International Women's Day will be celebrated under the theme For All Women and Girls, Rights, Equality, Empowerment. This year's theme called for action that can unlock equal rights, power, and opportunities for all by empowering the next generation, especially young women and adolescent girls. On the next edition of Our Voices, we kick off Women's History Month by taking a closer look at the call to accelerate action. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
In other news, Germany says it is halting new development aid to Rwanda, and it is also reviewing its existing commitments in response to the African nation's alleged role in the conflict in neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo. The German Development Ministry says Berlin informed Rwanda in advance of the move and urged it to withdraw its alleged support for the M23 rebel group, which has made advances in eastern Congo. Rwanda calls Germany's action wrong and counterproductive. And a Tunisian court has started a high-profile trial in which 40 people stand accused of conspiring against state security. The accused include leading opposition politicians, former diplomats, business leaders, and lawyers. Activists protested outside the courthouse, calling it a baseless and politically driven case. In Ghana, where second-hand clothes are donated to charities worldwide, they often end up in landfills. Two brothers are taking a different approach, giving second-hand clothes a new life cycle. What started as a hobby is now taking them places. Our technology correspondent Paul Ndiho has more. Hello, Paul.
Thanks, Esther. Bowie and Bill fashion label, founded by brothers Elisha Bowie and Calvin Bill, showcased their unique approach to fashion. They are making a name for themselves in Ghana's fashion scene. I spoke to Elisha about the duo's unique designs using simple technology and recycled materials.
We are from background, several recycling and both recycling and upcycling projects, using more like plastic waste to do like costumes. We started incorporating like plastic waste into our clothing, and also using second-hand clothing. Most of these clothing were imported into the country. Upcycling them. Upcycling is more like just sort of upgrading them or transforming them into something. So we started creating costumes with them and doing photo shoots, fashion shows, etc. And also even being invited to some schools to talk about all these projects, to talk about upcycling and the need for sustainable fashion.
How much technology is involved for you to get something that has been discarded and you turn it into this fabulous clothing that like I see you wearing?
We're just being creative and just sometimes adding some new pieces to them. Some of the clothing per se, when we get them, they are very old. The fabrics are very old, so we have to re-dye them, like use tie and dye techniques to dye them and give it some color. Some also we have to do like screen printing some images and some pictures into it just to make it look more new and something that people will be willing to wear again, more like giving it a second life. Yeah, so that's pretty much the technique we've been using.
You've transcended borders. You are no longer a local Ghanaian brand. You are an international brand.
Yeah.
How does that feel to be seen as this influencer who has changed fashion in your country and around the world?
To me, fashion was more than just the clothing and the wearing. I wanted to do something that had a message. We've been able to showcase our stuff all around the world. And we also get invitations to put up shows and displays of some of the amazing things that we've been able to do with the plastic waste and secondhand clothing and all of that. So I think it's paying off. Yeah.
Of the countries that you've traveled to trying to showcase your fashion brand, which country would you say has connected more, or which people have connected more with what you're trying to do?
Finland has been very supportive of the idea. We showcased at the Helsinki Fashion Week, and we have done that twice. So they've been very supportive of the idea. The first time I showcased there, and the second time they also invited me again, and also this time we discussed about me staying for a longer period to work on my ideas and collaborate with some other designers also here. Yeah, so I've been here for a while now, for like a year now. I wanted to take the message a bit higher and outside, because in Ghana I was like everywhere. I was on every TV, every platform, every fashion show. So I really feel like I did everything in the country.
Maybe you need to hook me up. Elisha Bowie co-founded the Bill and fashion label in Accra, Ghana. That's today's report. Back to you, Esther.
Very nice piece there, Paul. Thank you. Be sure to join Paul Ndiho each Wednesday for another tech segment on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.